Most conditioning does not arrive as control. It arrives as normality. It becomes the invisible rhythm of daily life, shaping how you react, how you think, and even how you define yourself. You rarely notice it because it feels familiar, and what feels familiar is rarely questioned. This is where invisible influence begins. From childhood, the brain learns through repetition. Patterns are absorbed long before awareness develops. Emotional responses, beliefs about safety, ideas about success and limitation are silently installed. Over time, these learned patterns stop feeling learned. They begin to feel like identity. The mind is not designed to question everything. It is designed to survive, to conserve energy. So once a behavior proves predictable, the brain automates it. Automation reduces effort, but it also reduces awareness, and when awareness disappears, conditioning becomes powerful. Invisible conditioning shapes perception itself. It determines what you notice and what you ignore. It influences what feels possible and what feels unrealistic. Many limitations people experience are not external barriers. They are internal expectations repeated so often they became reality. This is why some emotional cycles repeat for years. The nervous system prefers known discomfort over unknown freedom. Familiar pain feels safer than unpredictable change. So the mind maintains patterns even when they silently restrict growth and personal power. Control that is obvious creates resistance, but control that feels natural creates compliance. When influence becomes part of routine, it no longer feels imposed. It feels self-chosen. This illusion of choice is one of the most sophisticated psychological mechanisms shaping human behavior. Over time, repeated experiences form internal rules. These rules guide decisions automatically. You may believe you are acting freely, while in reality you are following scripts written by past environments, emotional conditioning, and unconscious adaptation. The brain trusts repetition more than logic. If something happens often enough, it begins to feel true, even when it limits potential. This is how invisible boundaries are constructed, not through force, but through consistency. Many people live inside psychological structures they never consciously built. They simply inherited them. Social expectations, relational dynamics, silent fears and invisible permissions create a framework that defines how far someone believes they can go. Yet the moment awareness enters the system, something changes. Patterns that once felt automatic begin to feel observable, and observation creates distance. That distance is the first disruption of conditioning. Once awareness begins, the illusion of inevitability weakens. What once felt permanent starts to feel constructed. You realize that many reactions are not spontaneous, but rehearsed. They were practiced emotionally until they became automatic. This realization is uncomfortable, yet it is also the beginning of psychological freedom. Conditioning survives through invisibility. The more subtle it is, the more durable it becomes. Loud control can be rejected, but silent influence integrates itself into identity. Over time, people defend the very patterns that limit them, because those patterns feel like part of who they are. The nervous system does not distinguish between truth and repetition. It distinguishes between safety and uncertainty. Anything repeated consistently becomes associated with survival. This is why breaking patterns feels threatening, even when the pattern itself is painful or restrictive. Invisible conditioning shapes emotional tolerance. It teaches how much discomfort feels normal. Some individuals grow used to tension, silence, or emotional distance, interpreting these states as stability. In reality, they are adaptations created to maintain predictability. Predictability creates psychological comfort, but it can also create stagnation. When life becomes a series of repeated internal reactions, growth slows. New possibilities are filtered out before they can even be considered. The mind protects the known at the expense of expansion. Many decisions are influenced long before they reach conscious thought. By the time a person believes they are choosing, the emotional system has already evaluated risk and safety. What feels like a personal preference is often a conditioned response shaped by past reinforcement. Social environments reinforce conditioning through subtle feedback. Approval, rejection, silence, and attention all shape behavior. Over time, individuals learn to adjust themselves to maintain belonging. This adaptation can become so refined that authenticity feels unfamiliar. The mind begins to organize reality around learned expectations. Opportunities aligned with conditioning feel attainable, while unfamiliar paths feel unrealistic. This creates invisible ceilings that limit ambition, expression, and psychological power without any external force. Repetition not only builds habits, it builds identity narratives. People start describing themselves using patterns they never consciously chose. Statements like "this is just how I am" often mask years of unnoticed psychological programming. Breaking conditioning does not require dramatic action. It begins with interruption, a pause in automatic response, a moment of observation before reaction. This small disruption introduces flexibility into rigid internal systems. Flexibility creates psychological space. Within that space, new interpretations become possible. Emotions can be experienced without immediate behavioral repetition. The individual begins to experience themselves not as fixed, but as adaptable. Adaptability is a form of power rarely discussed. It allows the mind to move beyond inherited limits and reconfigure responses intentionally. This process is gradual, often subtle, but its effects accumulate, reshaping perception and decision-making. As awareness grows, previously invisible influences become visible patterns. Situations that once felt confusing begin to reveal structure. Emotional reactions reveal their origins. Behavioral cycles reveal their triggers. Understanding replaces unconscious repetition. Understanding alone does not dissolve conditioning, but it weakens its authority. Once a pattern is recognized, it loses the illusion of inevitability. Choice begins to emerge not as a concept, but as a lived psychological experience. This is the turning point where internal power starts to develop, not through force, but through clarity. The ability to observe one's own conditioning creates a new level of mental sovereignty that cannot be easily manipulated by external expectations. Mental sovereignty begins when repetition is no longer unconscious. When you start noticing patterns as they form, you interrupt the automatic chain between trigger and reaction. This interruption is subtle, yet it marks the beginning of psychological independence. Independence is not the absence of influence. It is the ability to recognize influence without being controlled by it. Many people remain trapped because they mistake awareness for weakness, when in reality, awareness is the foundation of strategic power. Strategic power develops through observation. Instead of reacting immediately, the mind learns to analyze emotional impulses. This creates distance between stimulus and behavior. In that distance, choice becomes possible for the first time. Choice is often uncomfortable because it requires abandoning familiar internal structures. Even limiting patterns can feel safer than uncertainty. The nervous system prefers known discomfort over unknown freedom, maintaining stability even when growth is needed. Breaking conditioning feels unnatural at first. The mind interprets change as risk. Doubt appears. Resistance intensifies. and the old patterns attempt to reassert control. This phase is not failure. It is the system defending its previous equilibrium. With persistence, the emotional system begins to recalibrate. New experiences create new neural associations. What once felt threatening slowly becomes neutral, and eventually empowering. Psychological strength is built through repeated exposure to conscious change. Power is rarely dramatic. It often manifests as calm certainty. The ability to remain composed while internal patterns shift creates a quiet authority. Others may not see the transformation, but they will perceive its effects. Invisible conditioning loses its grip when identity becomes flexible. Instead of defining yourself through past reinforcement, you begin to define yourself through intentional direction. This shift changes how you interpret challenges and opportunities. Opportunities that once seemed unrealistic start to feel attainable. Emotional tolerance expands. Situations that previously triggered automatic withdrawal now allows strategic engagement. The individual moves from reaction to psychological leadership. Leadership over one's internal world is the highest form of influence. It allows decisions to emerge from clarity rather than fear. External pressures still exist, but they no longer dictate emotional responses with the same intensity. This transformation requires consistency. Occasional awareness is not enough. The mind must be trained to observe itself regularly. Through structured repetition, new patterns stabilize and begin to replace inherited conditioning. Structured mental training accelerates this process. When observation becomes deliberate, change becomes measurable. Instead of waiting for spontaneous insight, the individual develops a method for psychological rewiring. Rewiring is not about becoming someone else. It is about removing layers of automatic adaptation that were never consciously chosen. Beneath those layers exists a more stable, strategic version of the self. As clarity increases, emotional noise decreases. Decisions feel less chaotic. Internal conflicts lose intensity. This does not eliminate challenges, but it changes the way they are processed and integrated. Eventually, what once felt like effort becomes natural. New responses stabilize into new habits. The nervous system begins to associate awareness with safety instead of threat. This marks a profound shift in psychological functioning. At this stage, influence can be used intentionally. You are no longer only shaped by external environments. You begin shaping your own internal responses. This creates a level of autonomy that most people never fully experience. However, reaching this level requires more than motivation. It requires a clear protocol. Without structure, awareness remains theoretical. With structure, awareness becomes transformation. A psychological protocol provides direction during uncertainty. It guides attention, regulates emotional reactions, and builds mental resilience. Through repetition, it replaces unconscious conditioning with intentional mental design. Those who apply structured mental strategies begin noticing subtle, yet powerful changes. Confidence becomes quieter, but stronger. Decisions become slower, but more precise. Influence becomes internal before it becomes external. In the next episode, we will explore the exact mental protocol used to interrupt conditioning loops and build psychological power step by step. Understanding influence is only the beginning. Learning how to reprogram it changes everything.